When we think of cartel violence, we usually think of the Medellin Cartel, Pablo Escobar's ruthless and bloody empire. But what if I told you there is an even more violent cartel in Mexico? Up until 2010, Mexican cartels fought over authority and territory, but extreme violence wasn't the norm, and declaring war on police officers and civilians certainly wasn't the norm either. But when Los Zetas split from the Gulf Cartel, they brought an unprecedented level of brutality in Mexico. Kidnappings, bombings, beheadings, and civilian murder started plaguing the country on a daily basis. It was a decade of sheer terror and panic before Los Zetas finally started succumbing to the government's efforts and the rival cartels' growing power. Trigger warning, the following video discusses topics of extreme violence. This is your chance to turn back. Welcome to Crime City. This is the full story of the Los Zetas cartel. On New Year's Day 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement saw a new level of collaboration between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The cartels hated this. An extremist group called the Zapatista Army of National Liberation launched an armed rebellion in southern Mexico. But this only prompted the National Mexican Army to take arms too. And this time, the U.S. got involved too, training the Mexican Army's special forces.
The United States had a school where it trained inside the United States many military officers from Latin America.
But the Army would split a million ways. In 1997, Ociel Cardenas Guillen took control of the Gulf Cartel and found himself in the middle of a brutal turf war. So he employed a retired Army lieutenant, Arturo Guzman de Sena, to recruit dozens of Army deserters from the Mexican Army's special forces. They were to become Cardenas' personal bodyguards. De Sena's federal judicial police radio was Z1. In Spanish, that's Zeta Uno. At the time, officers were known as Zetas, meaning the Z's. You guessed it, this is how the Gulf Cartel's army became known as Los Zetas. From the very beginning, their primary goal was to destroy any enemies of the cartel, from rival gangs to the police.
So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos, fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
Until the creation of Los Zetas within the Gulf Cartel, violence was just a means to an end for Mexican cartels. Bosses would order the assassination of rival kingpins to secure more power, and violent shootouts would ensure turf victories. But with the Los Zetas, it was a completely different story. These former special-trained soldiers already had a knack for senseless brutality and organized attacks. Now they were encouraged to be as brutal as they could be. They were even rewarded with honor medals if they outdid their peers in violence or kill count.
Zetas really upped the ante of violence within their conflict and their use of terror. I think a lot of this comes from the fact they were from the military and they had this instruction of how you defeat insurgencies, this anti-insurgency training that had originated in the United States.
Now, cartels were pressured to grow their armies and strategize more. Otherwise, the Gulf Cartel would soon take over. But until the war on drugs began in the early 2000s, the violence was still contained within the cartel world. And Los Zetas was still contained within the Gulf Cartel, but it would soon escalate beyond anything imaginable. In 2002, Mexican authorities killed de Sena. This was part of their kingpin strategy, meaning they would dissolve cartels by removing their leaders. Just a few months later, they arrested Ociel Cardenas too. For a few years, he continued to lead the Gulf Cartel from prison, just like Escobar did back in the early 1990s, remember? But in 2007, Cardenas was extradited to the U.S. Now the Gulf Cartel was left in the hands of whoever was ruthless enough to grab it. And who else, if not its own army, Los Zetas. But Los Zetas didn't take control of the Gulf Cartel. They broke away and formed their own cartel in February 2010. Needless to say, this started a terrible war between the Gulf and Los Zetas. In August 2010, the Mexican military stumbled upon a mass grave. As they began examining the grave, they were shocked to discover the bodies of 72 undocumented immigrants. Los Zetas had intercepted and killed them all, fearing they were going to be recruited by the Gulf Cartel. In April 2011, Los Zetas intercepted several buses headed toward two towns bordering Texas. They kidnapped hundreds of innocent people, then executed 193 people on a San Fernando ranch. The women were violated. The men were mutilated for hours before they were killed. Some men were forced to fight each other to the death with hammers and machetes, all for Los Zetas' amusement. The few survivors were recruited for Los Zetas. This was only because they suspected the people on the bus might be Gulf Cartel recruits. None of the two attacks were based on actual facts. Then, in August of the same year, Los Zetas set fire to a casino in Monterey. 52 people died, all of them civilians. Los Zetas were upset that the casino refused to pay protection money. Less than a year later, Monterey police discovered 49 decapitated bodies outside the city. They were just dumped on the highway by Los Zetas after a clash with the Sinaloa cartel. In 2014, Los Zetas once again suspected two men of stealing money from the cartel, so they rushed to their hometown of Allende and reduced 80 homes to ashes. Between 300 and 500 lives were lost. These were numbers unprecedented, even for the most ruthless cartel kingpins around the globe. Los Zetas were making history of the worst kind.
They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them.
Los Zetas ruled with fear, not money, power, or respect. The problem was, they were never interested in the usual cartel business of controlling trade routes into the U.S. They would take Mexico territory by territory, holding people hostage and killing and maiming until they gained control over it. Los Zetas was more of an invading army than a cartel at this point, so they didn't just dabble in narcotics trafficking.
They also take over the local drug selling, shaking down, kidnapping, stealing cars, selling pirated goods. They started taking over corrupt trade unions. So it wasn't just a fight about the drug trade of the United States. It was a fight about controlling every inch of territory and all of the businesses in this territory.
In 2010, Los Zetas also set their eyes on Pemex, the national Mexican oil company. The theft was made using tanker trucks. They attach a hose, unload the tank, and load the gas into their tanker trucks. And from there, they just stole it. Stealing such large quantities of oil is much more profitable than the white powder trade, which involves a complex process with several steps, from production all the way to smuggling. What's worse, it turns out there are several companies in the U.S. that actually buy stolen oil from Los Zetas. These 5 Texas companies were sentenced for this exact thing.
El gobierno trata de detenerlo, pero como hay mucha gente que se dedica a eso y hay mucho que les gusta el dinero, aquí puedes invertirle, para hacer un pozo le inviertes 200, 300,000, o sea, comprando un tráiler, comprando pipa, comprando material, y eso lo sacas en un día o en 2 días.
Sadly, it's true. And with the militarized power Los Zetas had, the authorities simply didn't stand a chance. And in many ways, they could do as they pleased. And once again, people would also fall victim to Los Zetas.
So, harassment and intimidation by the cartel are common here. They steal from the Pemex staff. In some bad cases, the cartels would fight against each other, and the Pemex staff would get caught in the middle.
Imagine knowing that anywhere you live, go, or work, you're not safe. You must always be ready to run at a moment's notice.
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, les digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
For Los Zetas, this is just everyday business. The DEA declared Los Zetas the most aggressive and technologically advanced Mexican organized group. At the height of their power, they felt invincible. Everyone was terrified of them, so how could they ever lose? Well, Mexican authorities never stopped fighting them, and nothing lasts forever. Mexican authorities continued their kingpin strategy within the war on drugs. In October 2012, the Mexican Navy killed Los Zetas commander Heriberto Lescano. His right-hand man, Miguel Angel Trevino Morales, took charge. Morales didn't have a military background, but his brutality was sometimes too much even for his own soldiers. If someone crossed him, he wouldn't just kill them. He would kidnap their children and boil them alive. Tragically, Morales boiled and burned several babies alive. He also personally killed 265 immigrants. But under Morales, the whole Zetas cartel became a gang of monsters and thugs.
Put them in acid and watch their bodies disintegrate. They have fed them to wild animals.
The cartel grew quickly, and it wasn't organized anymore. He just recruited anyone off the streets with a penchant for senseless violence. And you know what happens when a group is disorganized? Well, they start fighting each other. As the Mexican authorities continued to remove Los Zetas' top dogs, the group became more fragmented, less reliable, and less able to make a profit. Oil theft decreased, and the drug trade was secured by the notorious Sinaloa cartel, led by El Chapo and El Mayo. They had the international connections and logistics necessary to make a steady profit. Los Zetas focused on kidnappings and extortions, but that rarely makes a worthy profit, and the pain and suffering caused are bound to get the army on your tail. Someone else was on Los Zetas' tail, other, bigger, stronger cartels. In an ironic twist, the Jalisco New Generation cartel was inspired by Los Zetas' extreme violence and military-style fighting. They copied them, and they got better at it. Eventually, the CJNG and Sinaloa cartels slowly reduced Los Zetas to ashes. Morales was arrested, and the small cartel members were either recruited by the CJNG, killed, or arrested themselves. Sadly, the extreme brutality that Los Zetas started was now raised to new heights by the CJNG. They torture and kill their enemies by exploding them with dynamite in front of their friends and families. They set fire to police cars and hunt police officers inside their own homes.
Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
Indeed, the CJNG kingpin, El Mencho, is now famous for attacking the police and civilians with militarized drones, something that was not technologically possible until recently, and something that is once again terrorizing the Mexican communities to an unprecedented level. It's an eye for an eye for an eye, and the violence never seems to stop. And the worst bit? Many of these cartel members enjoy spreading terror and taking lives. Just watch a former Los Zetas assassin, Reda, discuss his crimes.
Chile, presta. Que se duerme luego, mano. Y pues todo, pues, se hizo como un guion de James Bond.
Monsters give birth to monsters. Los Zetas' shocking brutality only inspired more brutality in other cartels, and in the end, in people that carry out these horrifying attacks. How will the violence ever end if cartel members keep recruiting newbies and exposing them to a world where fear is the only currency? Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about Los Zetas? Will the violence ever come to an end? And are the authorities any closer to dissolving the violent Mexican cartels? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe.